Janelle and Kody were never legally married. Let that sit for a second. 29 years, 6 kids, a life built side by side in front of millions of cameras. And on paper, in the eyes of the state of Utah or Arizona or Wyoming or wherever they happen to be living that year, nothing. No marriage license, no legal tie to dissolve. So here's the question that should be bothering you right now. How exactly do you divorce a man you were never legally wed to in the first place? There's no courtroom for that. No judge, no 6-month waiting period, no signature on a dotted line. The real answer is quieter than any of that, and honestly, a little stranger. It's a private meeting with church leadership, a process almost nobody outside their old faith has ever heard of, called a spiritual release. And in the final stretch of 2025, Janelle Brown went looking for one. By the end of this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened when she finally sat down in that meeting, and the one line she said walking out of it that tells you more about how she actually feels about Kody than anything she said publicly in the last 2 years combined. But that line doesn't mean anything yet, not until you understand what a spiritual release really is, who actually holds the power to grant it, and what almost happened to Meri Brown when she asked for the exact same thing first. So let's start at the beginning, because this family's entire marriage history is stranger than most people realize. Here's the part that's actually documented. Not fan theory, not speculation. It's on the record from the family itself. Kody Brown was only ever legally married to one wife at a time, because that's the only way plural marriage survives in a country where bigamy is illegal. In 1990, he legally married Meri. In 1993, he entered into what the family calls a spiritual marriage with Janelle, recognized by their church, recognized by the family, celebrated the same way any wedding would be, but never filed anywhere. Christine joined as a spiritual wife in 94. Robin joined in 2010, also spiritual only. And then in 2014, something happened that a lot of casual viewers never fully clocked. Kody and Meri legally divorced on paper so that he could legally marry Robin instead, mainly so he could adopt her 3 kids from a previous relationship more easily. Meri and Kody stayed together as spiritual husband and wife after that. Legally, though, from 2014 on, Robin was the only wife who technically existed to the government. Everyone else was a spiritual wife only. Now hold that thought, because it matters more than it sounds like it should. When these marriages end, there's no divorce decree for most of these women. There's no legal severing because there was nothing legal to sever. So if you're Christine or Janelle or Meri and you've left Kody and you're building a new life, what do you actually do with a marriage that only ever existed in a spiritual sense? For a while, the answer for most of them was nothing. You just leave. Christine left in 2021 and has said publicly she never felt the need to formally close that door. She was done, and that was enough for her. But Meri didn't see it that way, and Meri went first. This is where the story actually starts, because Janelle didn't come up with this idea on her own. She got it from watching her former sister wife do it first, and it did not go the way anyone expected. Meri left Kody in 2023, and not long after, she went to their former church, a fundamentalist Mormon group called the Apostolic United Brethren, and asked for what they call a release. In their belief system, when you marry someone in the church, you're not just married for this life, you're spiritually bound to that person for eternity, unless that bond is formally dissolved by the church. Meri has said publicly that once that release is granted, there's nothing left tying the two of you together in the afterlife either. That's the actual stakes here. This isn't paperwork for insurance purposes. In their worldview, this is about where you spend eternity. And here's the detail almost nobody talks about, the one that should make you a little uneasy about how much power sits in that room. Meri has said that when she showed up for her meeting, the church leadership did not walk in intending to grant her release. She's described it as something she almost didn't get, that the leaders initially seemed to want to talk to Kody first before deciding anything. Think about that for a second. A woman showing up alone, asking to be let go of a marriage that ended years earlier. And the first instinct in the room is to check with the husband before deciding whether she's free. In the end, they did grant it. Meri walked out of that meeting single in the eyes of her former church for the first time in over 30 years. But it was not a guarantee going in. And that detail is exactly why Janelle was nervous walking into her own meeting, because she knew, better than any viewer did, that the answer wasn't automatic. So that's the blueprint. That's what Janelle was staring down when she decided in the back half of season 20 that it was finally time to ask for her own release. Now, here's where fans on Reddit start connecting dots the show never explicitly confirms, so I want to be upfront that this next part is theory, not fact. Around the same time Janelle started this process, she was also dropping hints on social media that her time on the show might be coming to an end. In one Instagram caption, she wrote about leaving the show and leaving a marriage almost in the same breath, describing both as less like breaking points and more like a kind of shedding, old versions of herself she didn't need to carry anymore. Fans immediately started asking whether the spiritual release was really about closing the door on Kody or whether it was actually about something bigger, a full exit from that entire chapter of her life, the show included. Nobody has confirmed that those two things are connected, but the timeline is hard to ignore, and I'd bet money it comes up in the comments below this video. Here's what is confirmed, though, straight from the show itself. Janelle told her daughter Maddie directly that she had to travel to Salt Lake to meet with church leadership about the release. And in a confessional, she admitted something that a lot of viewers found more vulnerable than anything else she's said on the show in years. She'd already reached out to leadership, already stated her case, already given her reasons. All that was left was the meeting itself, and she was scared. She had a specific fear, and she put a name to it. She used the phrase crisis of faith to describe what she thought might happen to her internally if the church said no. Think about what that means. This is a woman who has told the show more than once that she isn't really part of that church anymore in any day-to-day sense. And yet, the possibility of that same church denying her request was enough to threaten something as deep as her faith itself. That's not a small thing. That tells you this ritual still had real emotional and spiritual weight for her, even from a distance. She also hadn't spoken to anyone in that church leadership in over a decade. Imagine reaching back out to an institution you walked away from that long ago to ask them for something this personal with no idea how you're going to be received. That's the emotional temperature she was walking in with. Nervousness doesn't really cover it. This is where Meri comes back into the story, and it's actually one of the more tender moments in this whole arc. Janelle reached out to her directly for guidance, and Meri didn't hesitate. She offered to be there for moral support if Janelle wanted her around, and she talked her through what to expect based on her own experience. Two women who spent decades of their lives bound together as sister wives, now helping each other navigate the exit from a marriage neither of them are still in. If you've watched this family for any length of time, you know that kind of support between them hasn't always been a given. It says something that it showed up here. But that's not even the strangest part of this story, so stay with me because there's an entire belief system tangled up in this that most casual viewers have never even heard about. Within that same fundamentalist community, there's an old idea that's come up more than once on this show, that you're not really considered divorced, spiritually speaking, until you've moved on romantically with someone new. Christine has talked publicly about hearing this belief described to her. Both Janelle and Meri have put pushed back on it hard, calling it out of step with how they see their own worth and their own timeline. It's a small detail, but it tells you something important. This wasn't just a formality Janelle was walking into. It was a process wrapped in decades of doctrine she'd have to navigate, some of which she didn't even agree with. So all of that was sitting on her shoulders walking into that room. The memory of Meri is almost being denied, the fear of a crisis of faith, a decade of silence with the people she was about to ask a favor of. And underneath all of it, a belief system that doesn't always treat a woman's word as the final word. And now, finally, here's the payoff I promised you at the start of this video. Janelle got her release. And not only did she get it, by her own account, it happened faster and easier than she ever expected. In a clip released ahead of the episode, she's shown holding up the actual release paperwork. And she says it plainly. That was easy, she says. She admits she thought she'd have to come back for a second meeting. She didn't. The leaders, by her own description, were kind to her. And then she says the line I told you to wait for. She says it 4 times in a row, almost like she's testing whether it's really true. I am free. I am free. I am free. I am free. That's the detail almost nobody talks about when they cover this story, because most coverage stops at Janelle got her spiritual divorce. But listen to how she actually described the moment afterward. She said that as she was leaving the meeting, she felt something lift off her, like a weight she didn't even fully realize she'd been carrying. She said it must have meant more to her somewhere deep down than she'd been letting herself admit. That's not the reaction of someone who saw this as a box to check. That's the reaction of someone who didn't know how heavy that marriage still was until the moment it was actually formally, spiritually over. And there's one more piece of this that connects everything back to Meri, the woman who went first and made this whole path possible for Janelle in the first place. Meri has described the actual stakes of a release in her own words, that when they married in that church, it was considered a bond for eternity, and that having it formally terminated means there's nothing left tying the two of them together, even after this life. So when Janelle says she's free, she doesn't just mean free from an ex-husband she hasn't lived with in years. In the belief system she was raised in, she means free across a timeline longer than any of us can really picture. That's the weight behind those 4 words. The church also told her they'd take care of notifying Kody directly, so she wouldn't have to be the one to deliver the news herself. One more small mercy in a process that could have gone so differently. So here's where I want to leave you, because I think this story is actually bigger than one reality show storyline. A woman spent nearly 30 years in a marriage that never had a single piece of legal paper behind it. And when it came time to close that chapter, the power to let her go didn't sit with a judge or a lawyer or even fully with her. It sat with a room full of church leaders she hadn't spoken to in over a decade, deciding whether she'd earned the right to walk away free. Meri almost didn't get that. Janelle was terrified she wouldn't either. And in the end, it turned out easier than either of them expected, but only after they carried that fear all the way to the door. So I want to know what you think, because I know this comment section is going to split right down the middle. Should a religious institution have that kind of authority over when a woman is considered free from a marriage that's already over in every practical sense? Or is there something meaningful about a ritual like this, something worth preserving even when the marriage behind it has fully ended? Tell me where you land in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you want to actually understand this family, instead of just watching the drama fly by, that's exactly what this channel is for. Hit subscribe, because we're going to keep tracing these stories all the way to the source, fact by fact, the whole way through. I'll see you in the next one.